The 80s were a time for kaiju movies. King Kong had a remake in the mid-70s. The Return of Godzilla actually came to America. Ray Harryhausen made Clash of the Titans, which is vaguely a kaiju movie. And one of the first kaiju games ever was released with Rampage. And even more surprisingly, it's one where you control the kaiju. Rampage released in 1986 in arcades, but would go on to be an iconic success. In 1987, it would appear on the Zed Ex Speccy, Atari 8-bit, Atari ST, and Commodore 64. In 1988, it would land on the IBM PC, Apple II, NES, and the Amstrad CPC. 1989 would add the Master System, Amiga, an extremely late Atari 2600 port, the Atari 7800, and whatever the TRS-80 is. And in 1992, it would reach the Lynx. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Rampage had a brief run of sequels. In 1999, it was included in the Arcade Party Pak for PlayStation, 2003's Midway Arcade Treasures for PC, PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, 2005's Midway Arcade Treasures Extended Play for PSP, in 2006 as a bonus on Rampage Total Destruction for the Wii, GameCube, and PS2, which I rented a lot as a kid, and 2012's Midway Arcade Origins for PS3 and Xbox 360, plus there was a Tiger Electronics version in 1997. In 2000, it was released as a web browser game via Shockwave as the Shockwave Arcade Collection. It was released on iOS at some point. In 2017, the NES version was ported to a tabletop arcade cabinet by Basic Fun, and 1UP would release a mini arcade cabinet in 2018. Plus, of course, in 2015, it was a part of LEGO Dimensions for the Wii U, PS4 and 5, and Xbox 360 and 1, because that's why we're here. Safe to say, Rampage is up there with some of the most influential arcade games ever made. Part of Rampage's popularity probably comes from its simplicity. You are a kaiju. George, the King Kong stand-in, Lizzie, who fills the Godzilla-like lizard role, but was apparently more influenced by Ymir from Ray Harryhausen's classic 20 Million Miles to Earth. I actually own a Ymir statue, although it's not in the best shape. And Ralph. He's a werewolf, which is a surprisingly rare crossover with kaijus, but obviously has the classic monster sensibilities given the early to mid-century influence of the others. The goal of each of the 128 levels in the game is to smash all the buildings across iconic American cities, which you do by punching them, climbing them, and punching them some more. There's a few reasons this potentially repetitive game has stood the test of time. Part of it is just the satisfying feedback. When you damage a building enough, it rumbles before slowly collapsing, really feeling heavy and weighty as a full building would, and even as a kaiju, you need to hop off the building before they fall over to dodge damage. There's also a decent amount of obstacles between tanks and helicopters that need to be constantly swatted away, soldiers which can appear on the ground or in the buildings and shoot or lob grenades at you, but like civilians can be eaten to regain a little bit of health, and a few more passive obstacles like neon signs that block off your ability to climb and electrocute you if punched while they're lit, so you have to wait for them to turn off before smashing them so you can continue. It's not to say the game doesn't get a bit repetitive, it eventually does, but there's a surprisingly satisfying game tucked in here that carries its very simple loop pretty far. Not to mention, I mean, it's a kaiju game, of course I'm going to be soft on it. Some of my love for Rampage is admittedly the kaiju fanboyism on my part, but I think the game looks really nice as well. The monsters have great scale with the tiny little people, and all three have really cool and distinct designs, although I wish they were a little less humanoid. I assume partially at fault is the fact that all of them share the same general animations with different details placed on top, which is not a huge deal. It's a space-saving thing that they had to do with games in this era. But it would be fun if, for example, George was a little more gorilla-like, or if Ralph was able to run on four legs to move around a little faster, and that's something that later games would toy with a little bit. The buildings also have a nice sense of scale and weight to them, plus nice deformation as you break away certain parts of them, which is a pretty cool trick for the time. I would assume that they're just replacing out like the window sprites and layering a like generic Smash sprite over them, but it looks pretty cool. Unfortunately, the cities don't have a lot of variety. The buildings are all just generic pieces and the background never changes. So whether you're in New York, Minnesota, Florida, or Nevada, things do start to blend together, which is absolutely just a limitation of the time, but even a little bit of color changing could have gone some way to keep things a little fresher. And of course, this is also something that the later games would address as well. The game is also devoid of music outside of a short start game jingle, instead just featuring a lot of crunchy destruction noise. I think the little jingle is good, but it certainly doesn't help the eventual repetitiveness that the game is largely just a wall of crunchy smashing sounds and bullets, which isn't the worst thing ever. I think it's not as annoying as Gauntlet, but it could be better. In the year 2018, because the world is hell, we got a Rampage movie adaptation. There was a brief period of time where The Rock was the king of cinemas and everyone loved him, and then The Rock fatigue set in as people grew tired of his shtick. This movie came out right about that time and was directed by a guy who can only be described as The Rock's personal fluffer. He went straight from Cats and Dogs 2, The Revenge of Kitty Galore, to making several The Rock movies: Journey to the Mysterious Island, San Andreas, and of course this. Add in the fact that it's a video game adaptation, and we all basically knew what to expect. Rampage is a movie that should be significantly better than it is. I'm always going to play kids' gloves with kaiju movies, and I mean, I'm a Godzilla fan. I recognize the need for a human element for storytelling and budgetary reasons, but I don't know if it was The Rock ego thing or a budget thing, but the balance is way out of whack here. The last 10 minutes of the movie is a lot of fun. The kaiju designs are fantastic. I mean, George is kind of just a white gorilla, but Ralph and Lizzie are both very animalistic. Ralph is like this gangly, disgusting wolf who has skin folds he can fly around on, and Lizzie's a huge crocodile covered in armor and spikes and like jagged tusks. It looks fucking awesome. And when they all get together right at the end and fight, it's a pretty good time. Even if The Rock needs to be there to weaken the monsters before George is allowed to actually deal with them by like shooting them with grenades and stuff, that one seems a little like an ego thing. There's some element of a dumb fun kaiju movie buried in here, but the movie is tedious. There's so many scenes of The Rock talking about guerrilla psychology, the evil business people scheming to make more kaiju, which I don't even know why they would want to do that. I don't know what they gain from the whole situation. They both die horribly. I'm not sure if FBI agent Negan from The Walking Dead is allowed to trick a suspect into getting crushed by falling debris and dying horribly. And there's like a whole Rock love interest plot that is, his love interest is just there to exposit about genetics, and it's really, really dull. There's a pacing issue here, mind-numbing scene after scene of nothing happened being broken up with 2 to 3 minutes of fun. The helicopter chasing a giant wolf and then getting swallowed by it is like fantastic, and then it's followed by a solid 30 minutes of nothing before the climax comes. If there's going to be a human story in a kaiju movie, you need like something. The Rock should turn into a gorilla, or the humans should be fighting aliens that are controlling the kaiju. You just need a little je ne sais quoi, as it were. The Rock does have a goofy charm, but even he's struggling to milk too much out of this. He's the guy quipping about how smart gorillas are to ping pong balls covered in peanut butter while everyone else just sits around expositing. The only interesting character is Negan as this goofy southern FBI agent, so of course he shows up in like 10 minutes of the movie. Rampage is sadly a bit of a miss. A boring movie that should have been a pretty easy win, but now lives in the shadows of the also not particularly good Godzilla x Kong movies that came out right after. It's very boring popcorn slop, but you could probably watch the final battle on YouTube and have a decent time with that 10 minutes. Regardless of the movie itself, Rampage is a fun game. Kaiju games are shockingly rare, and while it does lack kaiju on kaiju combat, there's a fun simplicity and weight to the whole thing that makes it a good time. Some variety would be nice. Later Rampage games would offer some more variety in how cities looked and their obstacles and how the monsters played, but I always kind of just enjoy the simple act of climbing a building and holding up and left at the same time to smash the whole thing on my way up and then hopping down before it collapses, then eating some little soldiers. It's the perfect little silly game, and it's a very high concept game for the time, and its solid core gameplay keeps it strong for a solid 20 or so minutes, even with my kaiju bias aside.